let's start. This is our second discourse, and we have our reading first, and we take that from Luke. The last time we had the Decalogue. Why do we do this? Because the Pope, of course, bases his whole argument on the Old Testament and the New Testament, and particularly the Ten Commandments. So we read the Ten Commandments the last time, and now we move into the New Testament. And there we have, of course, two places where the Sermon on the Mount is. One is Matthew, which we usually read in the past, but now we want to look at Luke, the same version in Luke, which is a little bit more radical than the Matthew. So then fixing his eyes, that means Jesus, Rabbi Jesus of Nazareth, fixes his eyes on his disciples. He said, "How happy are you who are poor?" The spirit is missing here, just poor. "Yours is the kingdom of God. Happy you who are hungry now, you shall be satisfied. Happy you who weep now, you shall laugh. Happy are you when people hate you, drive you out, abuse you, denounce your name as criminal on account of the Son of Man." That comes from Daniel. That's the only title which Jesus used for himself. He never called himself Son of God or Messiah. "Rejoice when that day comes and dance for joy. Then your reward will be great in heaven. This was the way their ancestors, the Jewish ancestors, treated the prophets." Now come the curses. "But alas, for you who are rich, you are having your consolation now. Alas for you who have your fill now, you shall go hungry. Alas for you who laugh now, you shall mourn and weep. Alas for you when the world speaks well of you. This was the way their ancestors treated the false prophets." Now that shows very clearly on which side, of course, in the class struggle the New Testament stands. It identifies obviously with the oppressed, with the poor, with the exploited, and so on. So now the question is, what does the Pope make of all of this? And we come to our discourse the last time, so I just want to introduce the discourse of tonight. We are making history once more. So in our first discourse, we reflected on our present political situation, which we have now, the broken government. All last week they talked about the broken government, whatever that means. But we know how the situation come about and where we are. The pre-Roosevelt neoliberalism led us into the present economic catastrophe. That it's daily expressed, of course, by different television stations, and they are not going back only to the second Roosevelt. They go back to the first Roosevelt, to Theodore Roosevelt, who already wanted to introduce the Fed into economic affairs, and he already wanted to have a health insurance for all Americans. So this, for the neoliberals, was the beginning of the end, where we lost America or whatever. So that goes back to the beginning of the 20th century. And whenever you see these people discussing health insurance, think that Theodore Roosevelt did already discuss it by 1908. And they still want to scratch the whole thing now, wipe it all out, what has been done in recent months, and want to start anew. That is called what's called the pathology of reason, the pathology of reason. And the question is how it is possible that our mode of production, that means the industrial commodity production, can make human reason, deform human reason in such a way as it appeared yesterday, for instance, in the president's discourse near the White House. So on one side, the pre-Roosevelt people have driven the wagon of the American economy into the abyss because of deregulation, deprivatization, tax cuts, and so on. And the post-Roosevelt liberalism, which the president represents, has a hard time to get us out of it. The question is, are there any alternatives to that liberal mindset? And I mean the double liberal mindset now, the pre-Roosevelt people and the post-Roosevelt people. And of course, there are different issues. We have over the weekend, we have a meeting of the International Hegel Society here in Kalamazoo, and that is really a great event. So here is one offer. Hegel, as a philosopher, could be an alternative to liberalism, because Hegel considered liberalism to be bankrupt already by 1827. That means after or during the first Great Depression, 1827, when everything broke down in England and wherever capitalism was, including the United States. So at that time, he said, liberalism is obsolete. What does that mean? That means liberalism is a Protestant, atomistic type of a social theory. Now, it has its truth, and the truth is the importance of the individual, the entrepreneur, that everybody takes care of himself, and so on. There are true elements in liberalism. But what is missing is solidarity. And what Hegel offers to people is that only through institutions we can really become free. So it is not the isolated individual who is really nothing, but it is through the mediation of society, through solidarity. Hi, hello, nice to meet you.
Hello, thank you.
Come, take your place wherever you want to go.
Yeah, what a place I'm playing out.
Okay,
Yeah.
wonderful. You are a heroic person to make it in this icy weather.
Thank you. Thank
Yes.
you. You too.
We all can congratulate each other.
You
Yes.
have another copy?
Oh, yeah, right. Okay. Very good. Okay, very good. So,
I hope I didn't miss too much.
no, we missed the last time because I was ill,
Okay.
so we have only met the second time today.
Okay.
Yeah, so you are wonderfully in time. So, we just described our present situation, and the issue is if there is an alternative to liberalism. And we have an International Hegel Society meeting in K College tomorrow, which is a wonderful accomplishment of our school. The K College has always been a very progressive place. They played Brecht, 40 years before Western had the first Mother Courage play, so they are always ahead intellectually, I think, of us, which has to be congratulated. So, nevertheless, they offer Hegel as, and it is not by accident that they have done this. I think they know exactly what they are doing. In this situation in which liberalism is in crisis, in both of its forms, they offer the great philosophy of Hegel. Now, how effective this will be is another question. Hegel created the first new logic after Aristotle. And we had this up to 1929. We taught that in our schools. My children's grandfather in New Haven in the high school, he learned this. You could learn this in Philadelphia by Hegelians on the left. You could learn it in St. Louis by Hegelians on the right, businessmen. But then, during the Great Depression, we thought that this dialectical thinking would be subversive and that it would destabilize. And therefore, we replaced Hegel by older forms, namely by Aristotelian forms of logic, again, formal logic. And so when we teach that on campus, when we teach critical thinking or whatever, that is all pre-Hegelian thinking. And so it is amazing that this International Hegel Society meets here in order to make such an offer. What they practically say is, look, liberalism has come to its end. Maybe Hegel was right in 1828 when he said liberalism is obsolete. And the obsolescence consists in that an atomistic social theory cannot help us when we are in a broad collective crisis. That is the issue. If that is New Orleans, a natural catastrophe, or if it is a financial catastrophe. So, of course, if Hegel is still sufficient at that time, he had studied Adam Smith, he had studied Ricardo, he had studied Sayce, he knew the whole bourgeois economics, which was a new science at that time, and he admired economics as a new science and integrated it into his system already in his Jena system designs, which was one of the earliest things he wrote. So he has been attacked by liberals because he was critical of liberalism. On one side, people thought he was a very conservative man. On the other side, they thought he was a revolutionary, and they somehow sentenced him to death after he was dead already. So people did not grasp him completely. But it is viable to say at this moment, you know, we need all the help we can possibly get, and maybe this great Protestant theologian and Lutheran and the greatest philosopher whom the West and the bourgeois modernity has ever produced, unfortunately also the most difficult one, and one wished one could make all that easier. But nevertheless, this is a wonderful thing which K College is doing at this moment.
Can you tell us tomorrow they're meeting?
Yeah, I think on Saturday.
Is that right? The little
The
college right here?
Yeah.
They're the opening thing is
And
tonight.
pardon?
The opening keynote address is tonight, and then tomorrow morning they start with the responses and papers on Hegel. The international
10
conference.
o'clock.
8:30.
Yeah, if you can make it, it's
I'm
wonderful.
going to the first
Now,
one.
we,
8:30 at King College, what's,
Home
it is
Mendeley
their main
Hall,
room there.
Homestead
Yeah,
Room.
Homestead room, yeah, it's their
Homestead
main room, yeah.
Mendeley Hall or something.
By the way,
Hall.
you know, by 1975, we had a Hegel thing. I organized it here at Western, and of course, all my teaching in the 40 years, you know, had something to do with Hegel. So in that sense, but it did not spread on campus. Our philosophers thought, you know, everybody has to know the phenomenology of the mind, but you need a whole lifetime to study it, and so therefore they didn't even start. A wise thing to do, but this is not the way how you can overcome a great thinker. You can only do it by going through him and show his weaknesses and so on. And so we are not guilty. We have in all my courses in the philosophy department, sociology department, religion department, I have always emphasized the importance of Hegel and tried at the same time to go beyond him. Now, tonight, we are concerned with another alternative, and that is the Roman Catholic social encyclical letter movements, which is Aristotelian. Now, there are also strong Aristotelian elements in Hegel, of course, and also Marx was an Aristotelian. So, therefore, this is another offer. It is unfortunately confessionally bound, so that people may say, well, this is a Roman Catholic thing, and therefore we are good Protestants and good Jews or whatever, and we don't want to. Yes?
Excuse me, you said Marx was an
Aristotelian, yeah.
Aristotelian, yeah.
Right, yeah. Well, what that
That
means.
was his first position. He didn't become a Hegelian later?
Well, yes, he came to Berlin in 1841, and Hegel had died already at that time in 1831, so he came 10 years after Hegel's death, and he joined the young Hegelians, which then became the left-wing Hegelians. So the school split into three versions, and what you will have in K College is right-wing and center Hegelians. Left-wing Hegelians have their own groups and so on. So several years ago, I'm a member of this group, but I had a public controversy online with them and why I did not come anymore, because it was too much on the right and so on. But it was a very peaceful and very civil type of discussion. So, but our point is, when I say Aristotelian, let me just go into the background. We want to explain all these little things for us. Aristotelian means the following thing. There was a big struggle in the Middle Ages which was called the universality struggle. And there were three positions which the scholastics expressed in Latin. One was universale ante rem. That means the idea is before the thing, Plato. There is a heaven of ideas, and the world is only a shady reflection of this heaven of ideas. The Aristotelian position was the universale in re. The universal is in the thing. So the idea is in the tree. And it works in the tree as what the Greeks called ousia or entelechia. That means as a purpose force. So how big the branches are, how many leaves, what the leaves look like, and so on. All that is steered by the inner entelechia. This entelechia was dropped by the natural science revolution in the 18th century. So since that time, our natural scientists do not think teleologically anymore. Uexküll, the biologist, tried to introduce it again. Also Freud tried to introduce it again. but it has not come through. It has not been universally accepted any longer. So that's Aristotelianism. But we are neither, and that is when we look at these encyclicals, we have to become aware of our own mindset, right? What is our mindset? Not only our anxieties and our feelings and so on, but also the form and shape our intellect, how we look at things. And so we are not Platonists here in America. We are not Aristotelians. We are Occamists. Wilhelm of Ockham introduced then the universale post rem. The idea is after the things. That means we look at things and the ideas are just forms of our intellect, and we impose them on this material out there, and then we categorize things according to genus and species and individuals and so on. But this is not in those things, not before those things, but it is in our mind, and then we impose them. And we cannot reach what Aristotle wanted to reach, namely the ousia, the essence of things any longer, or the truth of things. Remember, Adam in paradise, in a certain sense, was an Aristotelian, because he named all things, including his wife, but excluding God. And the names somehow reflected the essence of things. That is how it is presented. He knew the essence of all things. That's how he knew that Eve was flesh of his flesh and blood of his blood, and so on. But he did not know the essence of God, because in Judaism, unlike in Greece, you do not know the nature of God. You only know him entering into history through prophecy and giving orders and so on, and laws, but you do not know who he really is. And the second and the third commandment forbids you to make images of the Absolute. And the third commandment, not only to abuse the name of God, but even not to use it at all. Because as soon as you use finite names for the infinite, it all becomes wrong. And therefore, it all comes contradictory. And therefore, the Judaism does not say anything about the essence or the nature of God. So we are nominalists, right? And when we read those encyclicals, the Pope is an Aristotelian, and we are nominalists. We are the result of three movements of de-Hellenization. The Reformation de-Hellenized. That means Luther was the student of Gabriel Biel, and Gabriel Biel was the student of Wilhelm of Ockham. So therefore Luther was a nominalist, and so were his followers. And this country here is dominated by the Protestant evangelical paradigm of Christianity, which is nominalistic. Also the French Revolution, the bourgeois revolution, and the encyclopedists and the preparation of the French and our constitution, which is fundamentally a French document, was also nominalistic. And the present multiculturalism is also nominalistic. So the Pope is fighting against three movements of de-Hellenization. And he is quite brave in all this and stubborn in all this. But we have to ask ourselves who we are. That means what our constitution is. And we have been shaped by these three forms of de-Hellenization. So therefore we look at the Pope's document in the way we are. And the question is then, do we really understand the constitution of his mind? Do we really understand his mindset? And that means all the social encyclical letters from 1891 on to the present. So here you have, I didn't bring them all, but you have here Christianity and Social Progress, which was called Mater et Magistra by John the 23rd. You have Peace on Earth, Pacem in Terris. It's always in Latin, of course, the Latin Church. That means we are talking here about the Roman Catholic paradigm of Christianity, which is number 3. Number 2 is the Orthodox paradigm, and number 1 is the Jewish Christian paradigm. Here we have this fateful Humane Vitae, also an Aristotelian document. That means, very shortly, we know this all, the capitalistic ruling class, the bankers and the industrialists, whom we just paid with our tax money, put the American and other working classes in Europe on the pill for $10 million. They developed the pill, and since that time we are all on the pill, and from that time we are all zero population. That means we all reproduce ourselves twice. No, everybody once. So every family has 2 children. Only I overproduced myself because I had 8 children and I have 14 grandchildren. But these 14 grandchildren represent exactly the decisions of my children. That means each of my children, 7 who survived, have reproduced themselves once as the capitalist masters ordered it. They became conformist to the system in which we live, in spite of the fact that one did not get married, others had just 1 child, others had 3 children, and it balanced out. 7 children, 14 grandchildren. They are absolutely obedient to the system and have no idea what they were doing. They thought they were falling in love or whatever happened to them, but in the end the mathematics fits exactly. So this thing here is a strange type of a document. It is the reaction not only to the pill, it is the reaction of a commission which John the 23rd put together in order to make it easier for Catholics. He saw the horrible crisis. He saw where the industrial commodity production had led to, and that it was not possible anymore to have more than 1 or 2 children, and that people were in despair about this. So John the 23rd called that commission 2 to 1. The commission decided that Catholics should be allowed to be on the pill. But then comes this document, and it undid this decision of the committee after the death of John the 23rd, namely Paul VI, of this document. A very noble and decent man, but in panic. 70,000 priests left the priesthood and asked for laicization. 80,000 nuns left, and so on. They had allowed the window of modernity to get into the church, and it produced chaos. Frightened now, he wrote this encyclical. But this encyclical consists of 2 parts. One part is modern. It emphasizes that the individual is not simply a point through which the reproduction of the race goes, as it is with all other animals. That means individuals can use sexuality not only for procreation and for recreation, but they can also use in order to express their tenderness and their love and their acceptance of their partner and their mutual acceptance, which expresses somehow the sacrament of marriage. A sacrament means that one is accepted, and so it's not only that the 2 partners are accepted by God, but they accept each other, and so their mutual acceptance becomes a symbol of their being accepted by God. Unfortunately, the sacrament of marriage was established only in the year 1000, and by 1500, Protestant broke into Sweden, Norway, northern Germany, and so on, and cancelled 5 of the 7 sacraments, of which marriage was one. So since that time, we do not have in our overall secular culture the sacrament of marriage anymore. Protestant went on to bless the marriage, and then in the late decades of the 19th century, the states had to make decisions in order to avoid chaos, and the civil marriage was introduced everywhere, which also the state had the possibility to divorce again, which all then deepened the antagonism between the secular enlightened world on one side and the great world religions on the other side, of which we had one great explosion on September 11th, and a huge attack of one of the great world religions against secularism, against a society which had become totally secular state. There are, of course, religious groups in civil society, but the state as such is secular. There is a recommendation of a Chicago group to President Obama. They say that the secularism of this country and of our diplomatic corps elicits this unbelievable resistance everywhere by these world religions. So they recommend that all the diplomats should be educated in religion. And a woman from New York wrote a protest against that. She thought that we should not teach the diplomats religion. By the way, most of our diplomats are educated in Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., which is a Jesuit university. And there would be no problem, you know, not to teach them Catholic theology now, but what we call comparative science of religion. So I agree with that group in Chicago who have sent that to Obama, and I agree also with this woman now. She says in the end, when Lincoln was asked by a group of Protestant ministers that he should declare Jesus the Christ as the source of the American Constitution, he said, "I'll think about it." And he never did anything. I think that would not be the right answer neither. I think what one should do is to say, the American federal government and all the states are secular institutions. Our diplomatic corps is a secular corps. But these people, these diplomats whom we send all over the place, they should know the religion of their place, where they are. They should know what the Shiites are and what the Sunnis are and who is dominant and what the Protestants are and what the Catholics are and what the Buddhists are and what the Jainists are and so on. Now, if they should, as the Chicago people want, if they should make contact with these groups, you know, or if they should support one of these groups or so, that's another question. But we should think that I worked with the American government in Germany, and I cooperated with army chaplains who took care, for instance, in my area where I taught, they took care of Catholic orphanages. They brought presents and so on, and they thought that they didn't do anything bad or wild or whatever. So, but I would say that one has to be careful there. Our state organization is secular. It is neutral in terms of religion. It has to protect the religious people and their entrance into the public realm, but it cannot do anything further. It cannot support the Buddhists against the Hindus or the Jainists against the Buddhists or whatever. This would go beyond this. So sometimes you have two things, you know, like the Chicago people, they should all become religious, and of course Bush, you know, talked about a crusade or whatever. That was a horrible, horrible mistake. On the other hand, you have this totally secularist point of view, but I think we should educate ourselves so that we can find a good middle way there. Yes, secular diplomats, educated at Georgetown University, the Jesuits do an excellent job, and they should have a course, they should be literate in cultural things, they should be literate in religion. You cannot understand a culture without understanding its religion. So you should be literate. And then they understand what is going on wherever they have their consulate or their embassy or whatever. Now, they can also talk with these different groups, but they must always remain neutral here at home and over there. And I think this is a viable way how one can go, and not the one or the other of these extremes. So nevertheless, part of this here is modern. That means the human subjectivity, the dignity of man and so on, has been recognized. And Christianity has no difficulty to do that. But then comes the second part, and the second part is Aristotelian. And in the second part, it is the Aristotelian view of sexuality. And that means universale in re. That means purposive in the things. Things are not arbitrary, contingent, or whatever. There is a creator who is intelligent and who has put purposiveness into things. He has programmed birds to build their nests. So the nest building causality is not only a causa efficiens, that means where the bird pushes these things up the straw or whatever and puts it on the tree. This type of causality the sciences have kept, so they can very well understand that. What they cannot understand is that there is a purposiveness in the actions of the little bird, because this is not visible. That nest there which they built is not there yet, and they don't know if that is in the head of the little bird or wherever it is, but it is not empirically, empiricistically verifiable. and therefore they cannot accept it. But this happens in the second part. The Pope holds on that sexuality, like everything else in nature, has a rational presupposition that it is purposiveness. And so what is the purpose of sexuality? In all species, it is the reproduction of the species. And now the Pope says that one can use sexuality as a symbol of one's love for the other partner, but one must keep it open at the same time, and that is the crux of the matter, for the child. The recommendations of my teacher from Eastern Europe in Mainz, where I studied, was that the whole marriage should be open to the child, but it was rejected by Rome. Every sexual act has to be open for the child. And that, of course, then is an argument against the pill. Now, when the disaster struck then, and people didn't go to confession anymore, then Paul VI and the following popes tried a rescue operation. They suddenly remembered that Thomas of Aquinas had argued for the erroneous conscience. That means Thomas had argued that what decides over our fate in God's judgment on Judgment Day is not what the Church teaches, but it is what our conscience tells us. So therefore, they opened up the way now for every couple to say, my conscience tells me, in the basis of my circumstances of having this income in this type of industry and having already 2 children or 3 children or 4 children, or therefore we cannot have another child, and therefore we have to use the pill. And then they would be totally justified. If they do that with their conscience and talking with their husbands and talking with their doctors and maybe talking with their priests, then inform their conscience that way, then they can have the pill. So in that sense, every Catholic could have the pill if he can say, this is what my conscience dictates. And he would not have to worry about anything whatsoever. But there is a crux in this whole thing. The Church still calls it erroneous. And people are upset about this. Is it either my conscience counts, how can it then be erroneous? Well, what it means in terms of the Church's Aristotelian teaching, it is erroneous to take the pill. But in terms of your conscience, it can very well be valid for you. And what you will be judged by on Judgment Day is not the teaching of the Church, the Aristotelian teaching, but it is your conscience. So if people would not be authoritarian personalities, but real democratic personalities, they would not have any further problems. And they could then go to confession and would leave out this thing because that has been settled by their conscience. They are not guilty, but maybe they have to confess, I pay taxes, and thereby I participated in the murder of 1 million Iraqians. That would be something to confess. But I wonder who confesses this. I don't think anybody does. Instead of that, they are worried about sex all the time. If we would get that sex thing out of the way, then where we are really guilty in a murderous way could then, or that we allow these slums on the other side of the railroad station to exist in every American town, that would be something to confess, and so on and so on. So, nevertheless, this is another social encyclical letter before, and it has become a very controversial thing in the Church, and it's still going on because, in a moment, because it has led to a constitutional crisis. That means the people suddenly became liberal, and they said, what right does this Bishop of Rome have to go into my bedroom and to tell me what to do? And then that led to alienation from Rome. And I wanted to do that thing already. It's already, what is it, 1967, I think, Progressive Law was written, so we are already 2 years late. I think the Pope was already a year late, because the new social encyclical letter has to be written after 40 years. And so I think 2007, the last encyclical was written by Paul VI 40 years ago. So in what is 40 years ago? From 2007 back is what, 1967? Oh, 1967, right? So it was written in 1967. This is this one here, which is celebrated by the Pope in this one. So this is a birthday thing, and the birthday is the birthday of this, not Parliamentaris, not this one, not Peace on Earth, not Humanum Vitae, but it is the one which I
Bring.
Is there some church rule that you have to wait 40 years to write a new?
Right, yeah, well, this has become the custom, but let me say, I have it. See, because we had Rerum Novarum in 1891, new things have happened. That means 50 years after Marx, they suddenly discovered the beginning of industrial commodity production, which brought all the hellishness afterwards then in the slums and so on. So, and then the next one was 40 years later, that was in 1931. And the Roosevelt people took that principle of subsidiarity from this 1931 thing. And then 40 years later, we have this progressive thing, and then we have this birthday celebration now. But I thought I had it, and now it has escaped me. I'm sorry, but I bring it the next time. Okay, nevertheless, these are the other, and you can look into them if you want to. Okay, so what we said now was we somehow deviated a little bit because we want to know what our constitution is, what the intellectual constitution of the Pope is, and behind all these encyclical letters, they are all Aristotelian. And I took that example of the sixth encyclical, what that means. That means the Pope sees in the world not only chaos, but he sees purposiveness. And since this purposiveness reflects the intellect of God, we are supposed to be obedient to this. And that meant in the sixth thing, that meant that yes, you can be modern, yes, you can express your love and to your partner, and you don't have to intend, to have children with every sexual act, but at the same time, it has to be open, and of course, you can use the rhythm method. That means you can take the time in which no fertilization can take place in the woman's cycle, and that will be all right, but you cannot put an obstacle into the procreation process. That means you cannot have sex and at the same time block the entelechia, the purposiveness of sexuality. And the way out, which we recommended to Rome several decades ago, was to say, okay, this is true for the whole of the marriage. No, it is every individual act. So obviously, this has not been declared a dogma. Whatever is not a dogma can be continued in Catholic thinking to be discussed. So it is still open for discourse. And I think that the discourse should be continued. And the question is if the Church should not give up completely. It's Aristotelianism. But the present Pope, and we will see that, is one of the strictest representatives and opposition to the de-Hellenization of the West. And we will see why he holds on so stubbornly to this position toward the Muslims, and also toward his own Christian community, and toward the Jews, and toward the Protestants, and so on. It is obviously for him, if Christianity is de-Hellenized, it will not be Christianity any longer. Okay, so this was our first thing there. We want to look at the Pope as one alternative in a disaster situation in order to change, if there is an alternative to the mindset which has shaped the American history since the beginning of since the 19th century, practically since the 18th century. It's a bourgeois country, it's a country of the third estate. The philosophy of the third estate is liberalism, and this liberalism has come into great disaster. And the question is, can we replace it by something? And one thing would be what K. College is doing, the great Hegelian philosophy, which is also Protestant, in a Protestant country. Somehow Hegel could become what Thomas Aquinas was once for the Catholics and is still for the Pope. And Hegel could become the Thomas Aquinas for the Protestants as well. So maybe it's not too late. The great American poet who wrote The Leaves of Grass, Whitman was a Hegelian. And you have his poetry all around still. So when Whitman would say a great country must have a great thinker, and Hegel is that thinker for this country. Unfortunately, we missed it. But maybe we didn't miss it forever. So the K College offer should be taken very seriously. And we just make another offer, namely the Catholic Social Encyclical Letters, or what is called Catholic Solidarism. Because what is missing in liberalism is solidarity. And so therefore this could be an alternative, you know. So, and as I said, you know, we need all the help we can get, and not only, you know, $1 trillion from China or whatever, but we need also any offer we can get to change our mindset, because it doesn't work anymore. And you just have to turn on the television, you know, and look at Fox News, but you can also look at CNN, and you have the pathology of reason, which leads us from one disaster to the other. So therefore something has to be done. And so we have to concentrate on one option. But we want to make clear that there are other options out there. There's Marxism, you know. And with Marxism, Christians share from everybody according to his ability to everybody to his need. Marx took that from the Acts. He took that from the early Christian community in Jerusalem. So that it's a secularized form. It is an inverted type of theology which Marx took over. There is, you know, everywhere in Europe, people go to the libraries and they ask suddenly for new Marx editions. Thousands of people, suddenly the editions have gone up tremendously. Even the German finance minister said, Marx's crisis theory seems to be right. We should read it again. Now, nobody has repressed Marx more than in this country. Nowhere has Freud been repressed more than in this country. So this is another problem. We repressed it more. So how do you bring the repressed material back? You know, because it's in every head. Marx, dangerous, red, you know, they all see a red flag all over the place. So how do you get that out of people? You know, how do you get it out of senators, representatives, and then the masses and masses of people who are helplessly running around? And then we want to go to this now: time diagnosis, time prognosis. Walter, you had something still, or have you forgotten?
No, I read in the New York Times today about how Obama's trying to help people who work privately but under federal contract and are making less than $22,000 a year, and they're resisting this, you know. And what is $22,000 a year?
Yeah, right.
Slave wage.
I mean, this is part of the false consciousness.
The same people that hire these people for low wages are fighting any improvement in their condition.
Right. Okay, very good, thank you. That's one of those things which we want to look for very shortly. That means we wanted to connect our study of the Social Encyclical Letter, which is called Caritas in Veritate. That means love in truth, which means truth is above Caritas. And there you see already what, of course, Hellenization means. The intellect is above the will. All that has changed in the West. So from the first step on of this encyclical letter, the Pope is against the mindset which we all share. So that means for modern people from the 19th, 20th century, will is more important than the intellect. And he holds on to this thing that the logos is more important than caritas, than agape, logos more than agape, reason more than will and love and so on. So therefore, I told you the last time when I came to Baltimore and I taught with the Jesuits, they told me I could not teach the Social Encyclical Letters because I would lose all my friends. And I said, well, let's try it anyway, and I didn't lose all my friends. But it shows, you know, what is going on in this country. It never accepted the social encyclical letters. And the reason was that this liberalism was so powerful that, that it did not fit, or that the Catholics moved up in the class system. That means they moved from the fourth estate into the third estate. When they were in the fourth estate, in the working class, they couldn't read the encyclical letters because they were not educated. After they moved into the low middle class or middle class or upper middle class like the Kennedys, they could read them, but it was not in their interest anymore because it was written for the fourth estate. And not to speak of those who are in the lower upper class, middle upper class, and upper class, the country clubs of which the Kennedys could never visit. So therefore, and this came in the last two elections, you know, where they studied the Catholic situation, and they caught the Catholics because Karl Rove hired a Catholic professor, and he studied them, that the Catholics had upward mobility. They are now more inclined to vote for the Republican Party, and when we push a certain buttons, they will all vote for us, and they pushed the buttons. And the buttons was gay marriage, and the buttons was abortion. And they forgot completely the two wars, the casualties, the murderous thing, everything they forgot. So that is why masses of Catholics and evangelicals voted twice this last president in, and are fully responsible for ever what this president did. And there is not the slightest indication that they are aware of this type of responsibility which they had with this vote for all the consequences of these 8 years. So the social encyclical letter could help, you know, this awareness. Nevertheless, let me just look at a few points here. So we want to connect the encyclical letters with contemporary issues. What contemporary issues? So we sit here, we start, it's on page number 2, we start each discourse with the analysis of a few contemporary issues in order to connect the papal encyclical to our immediate social and political life, and we want to do that with the movie too, here in America. Since we met the last time, Benedict XVI has turned into a green pope. I don't know if you read that in the recent days. He is now the green pope. Why has he become the green pope? This man, on the basis of his own encyclical letter, did the following thing. It's very cold, and because it's so cold, therefore all the people in Washington said, the people who talk about global warming are liars, because it's cold. So, and tonight again, there is another storm going over the New England states. So that will be another proof that all these fellows who follow this, what is this former vice president there?
Al Gore.
Al Gore, that Al Gore and all his followers, you know, are damn it liars. And at this moment, the Pope joins Gore, of all things, and says the global warming people are right. And on the basis of the encyclical letter, he says, makes all kinds of concrete statements about carbon and about not eating so much and not consuming so much and boycott the commodity exchange process, which you really need, you know, to get out of the depression, because if people, you know, suddenly start fasting, it will be bad for the meat producers and for everybody else. But nevertheless, he is now on this side. That means an arch-conservative man who is always on the right celebrated his birthday in the White House with Bush, you know. And suddenly is with Al Gore. I don't know really if he knows what he did, but he is there, and he is called the Green Pope now. Now we should be very happy about this, you know, because maybe there is some insight coming up, and so we should really celebrate this. Second thing, Baptists were caught in Haiti because they took children out without documentation. So, of course, I think these people were all had the best intentions. Our Protestant brothers, they wanted to give these children a better life. Some of the parents gave them voluntarily, but they were charged with felonies, and it was very serious. Now, in the meantime, I think 28 have been released, and 2 are still in captivity. And but I hope that this will be regulated. It shows us, you know, not only with the Pope can get in difficulties with his with his document, but all our Protestant brothers who have similar programs and want to do good things, and may because of a lack of knowledge of what secular states are like. Haiti is the first secular slave rebellion and revolution under Napoleon, in which they liberated themselves, and of course then instead of French colonialism they got under American colonialism, and it has never really worked, and they remained the poorest country in the hemisphere. Also the liberation theologians who are the Pope's competitors, Aristide was a Catholic priest who was president there and tried to apply the liberation theology, which Ratzinger has repressed all the time, to Haiti, but he was under Clinton, I think he was overthrown by a military junta. Clinton tried to follow the laws and keep him there, but the junta put him on a plane and sent him back to Africa. I don't know if he's still there or what, with his whole family. So, and then of course the governments came in who prefer American investments and American corporations. So it has practically become an American colony in the meantime. So it shows us, what other Christians do, because Roman Catholics are only one paradigm of Christianity. Protestantism, and this is 1,200 groups in this country, are another paradigm of Christianity, and nobody should deny the Christian quality to anybody. These are real Christian brothers of us, as are the Orthodox brothers whom we meet there in Yalta, when we go to Yalta, where we have an international course there. And also sometimes in Dubrovnik, where we have a course here.
Did the Orthodox Church about the same time declare the sacrament of marriage too?
Well, it is also in Orthodoxy a sacrament, yeah, and it came about, I would say now, I would have to look it up, but I would say that it came about at the same time and is still a sacrament today, yeah. And it is still a sacrament today in Roman Catholicism, of course. So you could say a majority of Christians still have a sacrament of marriage. Yes. Mm-hmm.
You earlier mentioned that Protestantism eliminated 5 out of the 7 sacraments. Is that correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which 2 did they keep?
Baptism and what the Protestants call the Last Supper, or what the Catholics call the Eucharist.
Communion.
Okay, so their breaking of the bread,
Yeah.
is a sacrament?
Yeah, that's a sacrament, yeah. And that is kept by Protestant groups. But the interpretation is different. The Catholic interpretation of what happens in the consecration is called transubstantiation.
Right.
Luther calls it consubstantialization, and the Calvinists, the Presbyterians and so on, it is symbolical. So that's the difference. But they all have this sacrament, but they interpret it differently. Now the Episcopalian Church, the Anglican Church, has kept the 5 sacraments, but as minor sacraments. But they still have the sacrament of the priesthood, they still have the sacrament of marriage, they still have the confirmation and the last rites. And so that's the Anglican Church is somewhat, the Anglican Communion is in the middle between the Protestant churches and Catholicism. Right. Okay, so that was another thing there, and then a man burned himself in his house 3 days before the foreclosure. So we have that more and more happening, which shows us, that the crisis in the industrial commodity production system goes deeper and deeper. We had last year, every 36 American lost his house. Now we have 1 out of 10. It was 1 out of 36, now it is 1 out of 10 losing its house, and so on. But one case we have to discuss here, because that is an extraordinary case, and the press has repressed it. They reported it 2 days, and then they stopped it, because it was too horrible. There was a man from Texas. This time they have about 240 executions a year, which is more than any other state in the Republic. Bush had 152 executions, that was already the highest. And in spite of the fact we had this catastrophe in Texas again, so it does not seem that the death penalty, keeps murderers or suicidal or whatever acts out, but this is just an aside. A redneck man, a redneck. What is a redneck? Well, first of all, he has this big hat on. He marches through the airports with this big hat and has this big neck like a bull. And he goes, and he is a pre-Roosevelt liberal, really. That's what they are. That means they want to roam around in the Southwest without any sheriff or without any judge too close by, and the state is superfluous. That means, according to the old liberal idea, the state is only a night watchman. He should do some heaven knows what, probably the army or whatever, but as far as people's business, this shit state should stay out of business. Now, this guy was an engineer. He had a little airplane, and with this airplane he flew generally into Silicon Valley, and there as a computer engineer was very successful. He not only had an airplane, a little Cessna, but he also had a boat, and he had a house. So after decades of struggle with the federal government, writing to the representatives and so on, he came to the point of utter despair. And he started from a little airport in Texas, flew the straight line, even without making a curve, right into an IRS building and created an unbelievable fire. A little Cessna has only a few gallons of gasoline. You can almost do nothing with it. He must have filled the whole thing up with gasoline in the back and flew into this thing and put it all on fire, killed 3 people, wounded 24. And he left behind 8 pages of what he went through, intelligent pages. And we just want to pick 3 things out of it. First of all, he said that he struggled with Big Brother throughout his life, and that he is now exhausted. Big Brother comes, of course, from Huxley and Owens and the Animal Farm in 1984. That means all these things which were written in the 1920s and 30s in order to present what we here call all the time alternative future number 1. That means a totally administered society. And nobody represents the bureaucracy or the administration in such an intense way than the IRS. Because, first of all, they take things from people, but they also penetrate people's life most intimately. So we have here, a few days ago, a man from downtown sent me a little cross with Jesus on it, and it said, Siebert house is open for Christ. Well, it was one son of an old family here in town who wanted to go into the priesthood once, but the bishop didn't accept him because of I don't know what. Nevertheless, this family, 12 children, the father was an ammunition producer and salesman in Kalamazoo during the Second World War. He made a lot of money, and he had a wonderful house just a few streets down here near K College. And suddenly after the war, they found out that he had not paid enough tax, that he was guilty of tax evasion. So they put him to prison. And he was several years in prison. And then they let him go. And when they let him go, he wanted to rebuild again. So he started to build a big factory building, and after a year or 2, the IRS came back again and said again he had evaded taxes, and they wanted to put him into prison again. He went up under the roof of his factory here, not too far from here, and hanged himself. And his family and the 12 children were in that house. The IRS was merciful enough to leave the children in the house. But when the last child left, the IRS came again and took the house and put the old widow mother into a little miserable apartment where she is still living now. That is the IRS. And it stretched over 2 decades, 3 decades, mercilessly. without letting it go. And I have twice fought with them, long summers in conference calls. I called in a mediator. The issue was I spent a lot of things for students or whatever, and I asked if this could be tax exempt, and they denied it all. And so I talked to the mediators. The lawyers couldn't help because they didn't know what education was. What is it, these tax people here, they didn't know about it neither. But they said they would back me up if I would take my own defense. So I did my own defense, and I asked 2 senators here to help, and they both helped. And I asked the university, and the university wrote, and they were helpful. But they were stubborn. They did not want to, until I had to explain to them what education is. And I said the states have cultural sovereignty, and they have the obligation to educate their citizens, and their citizens are not educated. And when then an individual takes his own money in order to help this failed state, then he is punished for it. And I hammered this in day after day after day. And in the end they collapsed. And they made it all tax deductible. And then I can take this tax deduction and can reinvest it again in another project for the education process. But I'm quite sure they had been there before, several years before, and I had to do the same thing. I'm quite sure they will come back again after 3 years, and you have to do the same thing again. So this is the hellishness which that man faced. That means he faced the trend in the American civil society toward the totally administered society, alternative future number 1. He doesn't say anything about alternative future number 2, which would be the total militarization of the country, which is going on at the same time. So, nevertheless, what did he write? He wrote, this is Big Brother. So he writes about Big Brother and what he had to suffer from Big Brother, as if Big Brother was here already.